The uneasy peace between Earth and the Xynorians had always been fragile, held together by little more than thin diplomatic agreements and mutual exhaustion from decades of cold hostility. But beneath the surface, something far darker simmered. The Xynorians, with their sharp minds and even sharper politics, had always been calculating, masters of manipulation. And now, it was becoming clear that they were pushing humanity toward the brink of war. General Josh Rutherford watched the latest intelligence reports flash across the holographic screen in the war room. The Xynorian provocations were no longer subtle. Sabotaged trade routes, manipulated negotiations, and mysterious accidents among Earth's outer colonies had escalated to outright violence. The latest atrocity, however, had turned public sentiment into a burning demand for retribution. A small human colony on the moon of Tyros had been decimated in a brutal attack. Innocent civilians targeted in what was clearly a premeditated strike. Images of families torn apart, lives obliterated, were broadcast across every network, stirring rage among Earth's population. Rutherford clenched his jaw. It was the perfect play by the Xynorians. They knew exactly how to provoke humanity into a rash response, and now the people of Earth were crying out for blood. Politicians argued about diplomacy, but Rutherford knew there was no room for debate anymore. The Xynorians were playing a dirty game, but this time it would backfire. "They think we'll be as weak as before," Rutherford muttered, his voice low but resolute. Lieutenant Adira Anderson, his second-in-command, stood beside him. Unlike Rutherford, who had lost family to the Xynorian conflict years ago, Adira viewed the situation with cold pragmatism. She knew that the Xynorians' tactics weren't just about war. They were about domination, subjugation, and fear. "They want us to strike back," Anderson said quietly. "They've been maneuvering for this. But why now? They've never been this bold before." Rutherford turned, locking eyes with her. "Because they think we won't risk total war. They think their political games will keep us in check. But they're wrong. The Xynorians, an empire built on manipulation and subterfuge, had never been direct aggressors. Instead, they thrived in chaos, orchestrating conflict from the shadows while keeping their hands clean. But recently, their provocations had escalated, suggesting that something had shifted within their ranks. Their leaders, who were as cunning as they were ruthless, had always used intermediaries to sow discord. Now, it seemed they were pushing for full-scale conflict, driven by a yet undisclosed agenda. News reports of the Tyros massacre looped endlessly, each horrific detail driving home the cruelty of the attack. The Xynorian government, as expected, denied involvement. They blamed rogue factions, dissidents seeking to undermine the peaceful relations between their worlds. But no one believed the charade anymore, least of all Rutherford. "They're trying to break us from the inside," Rutherford said, pacing the war room. "By hitting civilian targets, they want to turn the people against their own leaders, make us look incapable of protecting our own. It's an old strategy, classic divide and conquer." Anderson folded her arms. "And it's working. The public is losing faith. If we don't act soon, they'll force our hand." Rutherford stopped and stared at the screen again, his gaze hardening. He knew that the path ahead wasn't just about tactical decisions. It was about survival. The Xynorians were pushing humanity into a corner, and soon Earth would have no choice but to fight back. But this time, it wouldn't be a skirmish. It would be all-out war. "We'll give them what they want," Rutherford said at last, his voice as sharp as steel. "But on our terms. We'll hit them where they least expect it, and when they least expect it." Anderson nodded, her expression unreadable. "What's the first move?" Rutherford's eyes glinted with determination. "We prepare for the invasion." As the war room fell into a tense silence, the weight of the coming conflict pressed down on everyone present. The Xynorians had provoked them, pushed them to the edge. Now, humanity would push back, harder than ever before, and the Xynorians would regret ever starting this war. The order came faster than anyone had expected. Within days of the Tyros massacre, Earth's global government convened an emergency session, approving the largest military mobilization in human history. The debate had been brief. Too brief for some, but for the majority, there was no other choice. The people wanted retribution, and the politicians, facing mounting pressure, gave in. War was inevitable. General Josh Rutherford stood on the command deck of the Lioness, Earth's flagship dreadnought, watching as the fleet prepared for departure. Below, the hangar buzzed with activity. Pilots running last-minute checks, engineers calibrating systems, and soldiers boarding troop carriers, their faces a mix of steely determination and apprehension. The air was thick with the anticipation of battle. "Fleet is ready, sir," Lieutenant Adira Anderson reported, stepping up beside him. She had been Rutherford's right hand since the beginning of this conflict, and he trusted her instincts as much as his own. Her composure, even in the face of imminent war, was unshakable. Rutherford admired that about her. Where he was driven by personal loss, she was guided by cold, tactical precision. "Good," Rutherford said. "How long until the invasion force is fully mobilized?" 36 hours, Anderson replied. "All units are on schedule. We'll be ready to hit the Xynorians hard." Rutherford nodded, though his mind was already racing ahead. 36 hours was enough time to finalize their assault plans, but not enough to avoid second-guessing every choice they'd made. The Xynorians were cunning, ruthless even, but humans had an advantage they didn't: adaptability. This wouldn't be a war of attrition. It would be a swift, brutal strike designed to cripple the alien war machine before it could fully react. "You think they'll expect a full-scale invasion this soon?" Anderson asked, her eyes scanning the battle readiness reports scrolling across the screens. "They'll expect retaliation," Rutherford answered, "but they won't be ready for this level of force. We've been building for this moment. The Xynorians have spent years trying to weaken us through politics and manipulation, but they've underestimated us. They think we're disorganized, fractured. We'll show them what a united Earth can do." He looked out at the assembled fleet, rows of battleships, frigates, and strike carriers, all state-of-the-art, equipped with the latest in human technological advances. Each vessel had been designed for one purpose: to win a war that humanity could no longer avoid. Rutherford felt a surge of grim pride. The Xynorians might have their subterfuge and cunning, but Earth had raw power and, more importantly, resolve. "We have to strike first," Rutherford said, turning back to Anderson. "Before they can organize a counterattack, we take the fight to them, hit their core planets, and force them to surrender before they have a chance to regroup." Anderson gave a sharp nod. "Understood. No mercy." "No mercy," Rutherford echoed, though he felt the weight of those words. He didn't relish the idea of wiping out an entire species, but the Xynorians had left him no choice. This wasn't just about revenge for Tyros. This was about ensuring the survival of humanity. If the Xynorians were left unchecked, they would continue their provocations, their manipulations. Earth couldn't afford that risk anymore. The war preparations continued at a feverish pace. Across Earth's military bases, soldiers suited up for battle, weapons were loaded, and ships fueled for long-range travel across the stars. Civilians watched from the sidelines, some cheering on their soldiers, others fearing the cost of what was to come. War wasn't clean. It never was. But to Rutherford, the alternative, allowing the Xynorians to continue their reign of terror, was far worse. By the time the final plans were in place, Rutherford felt a grim sense of readiness. The invasion would begin at dawn, Earth time. The Xynorians would wake to find their worlds under siege, their fleet scattered, their defenses shattered. There would be no diplomatic overtures, no offers of peace. The time for talk had passed. As Rutherford stepped away from the command deck, heading to the strategy room to meet with his senior officers, he cast one last glance at the fleet. Soon, they would launch, and the full force of human might would descend on the Xynorian Empire. "We're ready," Anderson said quietly, falling in step beside him. Rutherford's eyes narrowed. "Let's show them what happens when you provoke humanity." And with that, the countdown to war began. The human fleet erupted from hyperspace in perfect formation, a swarm of sleek, deadly warships descending upon Zynoria Prime, the heart of the alien empire. General Josh Rutherford stood at the helm of the Lioness, watching the planet grow larger on the screen, its green and violet atmosphere swirling beneath the light of a distant sun. This was the moment Earth had prepared for, the moment Rutherford had vowed would come. Now! Humanity's vengeance was about to unfold. "Status report," Rutherford commanded, his voice cutting through the tense silence of the bridge. "All ships accounted for." Lieutenant Adira Anderson responded, her fingers dancing across her console as she relayed orders to the rest of the fleet. "Zinorian Defense Fleet is mobilizing, but they're scattered. They weren't expecting this." Rutherford's lips tightened into a grim smile. "Good." The element of surprise was critical. This invasion wasn't about prolonged combat. It was about overwhelming force, crushing the Zinorian defenses before they could coordinate a counterattack. Earth's warships, bristling with advanced weapons, outclassed the alien vessels. But victory wasn't guaranteed. The Zinorians were desperate, and desperation could lead to unpredictability. "Engage the forward fleet," Rutherford ordered. "We take down their outer defenses, then launch the ground assault." The Lioness and her sister ships surged forward, weapon systems primed. Bright lances of plasma fire streaked across the void, striking Zinorian ships with pinpoint precision. Explosions lit up the blackness of space as the alien vessels crumbled under the assault, their hulls no match for the concentrated firepower of Earth's fleet. Despite their losses, the Zinorians fought fiercely, their ships moving with fluid, almost organic coordination, their weapons firing back in a storm of energy bolts. But it wasn't enough. One by one, their ships fell, debris scattering like meteors through space. "Shields holding at 70%, Anderson reported. "Minimal damage to the fleet." Rutherford nodded, his attention shifting to the next phase. The real challenge was yet to come, the ground invasion. "Prepare the dropships," he ordered. "We hit the capital first. Take out their leadership and the rest will fall." The invasion force descended through Zynoria Prime's atmosphere, the heat shields of the dropships glowing as they tore through the clouds. Below, the alien capital sprawled across the surface, a maze of towering spires and glowing energy grids. The Zinorians had fortified the city, but the sheer speed and brutality of Earth's assault had caught them off guard. As the dropships touched down, the human soldiers disembarked in perfect formation, their advanced exocets gleaming under the alien sky. Rutherford led the charge, Anderson by his side, as they pushed into the city. The Zinorian defenders, though disciplined, were no match for the human firepower. Plasma rifles tore through their ranks, explosions rocked the streets, and in moments, the once mighty alien capital was a battlefield. Rutherford moved with purpose, his every step calculated, his every order precise. The mission was clear: eliminate the Zinorian leadership. Without their command structure, the Empire would crumble. "Push forward," Rutherford shouted, his voice amplified by his suit's comms. "We take the Citadel." The human forces advanced, their coordinated strikes dismantling the alien defenses with ruthless efficiency. Zinorian soldiers fell back, retreating into the labyrinthine corridors of the Citadel, the seat of their government. But there was nowhere left to run. The humans stormed the gates, breaching the inner sanctum. Inside the Citadel, the alien leaders gathered, their eyes wide with disbelief. They had never anticipated such a swift and devastating attack. Rutherford's presence loomed over them as he and Anderson stepped into the chamber, weapons raised. "Your empire is finished," Rutherford declared, his voice cold and final. "Surrender now or face extinction." The Zinorian leaders hesitated, their pride and fear clashing in their expressions. For centuries, they had manipulated the galaxy, playing their enemies against each other, always believing they could control the outcome. But now, faced with humanity's relentless assault, they understood the price of their arrogance. We surrender," one of the alien counselors finally croaked, lowering his head in defeat. Rutherford didn't relax. Victory had come, but it was a bitter one. The cost of this war had been high, and though Earth had emerged triumphant, the scars of battle would linger. "Secure the city," he ordered, his voice hollow, "and prepare for the aftermath." As the human forces moved to occupy the capital, Rutherford looked out over the devastated landscape. Zynoria Prime, once the heart of a vast and powerful empire, was now in ruins. And yet, despite the overwhelming victory, Rutherford felt no satisfaction, only the weight of what was to come. The dust had barely settled over Zynoria Prime when the formal surrender came. Across the ravaged city, the Zynorian banners were lowered, their vibrant colors now symbols of defeat. The once proud capital was a shadow of itself, its towering spires shattered, and its streets littered with the remnants of a civilization brought to its knees. General Josh Rutherford stood at the edge of the citadel, watching as human forces moved through the city, securing what was left. The war was over, but Rutherford felt none of the triumph he'd expected. Victory, it seemed, was not as sweet as he had imagined. Lieutenant Adira Anderson approached, her face a mask of quiet contemplation. She had been with Rutherford every step of the way, and now, like him, she bore the weight of what they had done. "We've received word from Earth," she said, her voice low. "The Council is calling it a total success. They're already drafting the terms for occupation." Rutherford didn't respond immediately. His eyes swept across the landscape, taking in the wreckage, the bodies, the smoking ruins of what had once been a thriving city. The Zynorians had surrendered, but at what cost? Thousands of lives had been lost, human and Zynorian alike. The civilian population had suffered the most, caught in the crossfire of a war they hadn't asked for. The image of Tyros had driven them to this point, but standing here, Rutherford couldn't help but wonder if the cycle of violence had been inevitable all along. "Success," Rutherford repeated bitterly. "Tell that to the people who lived here." Anderson's expression tightened, but she didn't disagree. "It was the only way, Josh. We couldn't let them continue. The Zynorians provoked this war, manipulated it from the start. We just finished what they started." "I know," Rutherford said, though the words felt hollow. He had justified the invasion to himself 1,000 times over. The Zynorians had pushed humanity too far, and Earth had no choice but to retaliate. And yet, standing in the aftermath of their conquest, he couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had been lost. Not just the Zynorian Empire, but a part of himself as well. The Zynorian leadership had been taken into custody, their once arrogant rulers now broken and cowed. They were being processed for trial back on Earth, where they would face justice for their crimes. But even that felt like a hollow victory. Would it truly bring peace? Or was this just a prelude to something worse? "We should report to the Council," Anderson said, her tone softening. She could see the weight of Rutherford's thoughts. "There's still work to be done." Rutherford turned to her, his face set in a grim line. Work. That's all this ever was. He knew what awaited him back on Earth. Parades, accolades, speeches about humanity's strength and resolve. The war would be painted as a necessary evil, the invasion as a moral victory. But Rutherford had seen too much, lost too much, to celebrate. The Zynorians had been defeated, but they hadn't been the only ones who had lost something. As Rutherford and Anderson made their way back into the Citadel, the sounds of occupation filled the air. Human soldiers barked orders. Zynorian civilians huddled in makeshift camps, their expressions vacant, their spirits broken. Rutherford's stomach twisted as he walked past them. They were no longer enemies, just survivors of a conflict that had left both sides scarred. "We'll need to establish some kind of order," Anderson said, her voice matter-of-fact. "The Council will want to stabilize the region, ensure there's no resistance." Rutherford nodded absently, but his thoughts were elsewhere. How many times had the Zynorians used the same justification for their manipulations? Stabilize the region, secure peace through strength. It was a bitter irony, and one that Rutherford couldn't ignore. Inside the Citadel, Rutherford paused in front of a shattered window, the alien sun casting an eerie light over the ruins. He thought of Tyros, of the lives lost there, of the countless others who had suffered because of the Xynorians' ambitions. He had believed that this war would bring justice, that it would end the cycle of violence. But now, standing in the aftermath, he wasn't so sure. "We won," Anderson said, as if reading his thoughts. "Did we?" Rutherford replied, his voice heavy with doubt. Anderson didn't answer. The silence between them spoke volumes. As the human occupation began in earnest, Rutherford turned away from the window. The Xynorian Empire had fallen, but peace was still a distant dream. The war was over, but the consequences were only beginning to unfold. Rutherford had led his people to victory, but the cost, he feared, was far greater than anyone had anticipated.